It's the Blue Vote Cafe, a little bit of wonkish, a whole lot of fun. I'm David Schellenberg along with Rachel Oyster.
Get it right.
All right. It's been 87 of these. Sooner or later we'll get it right.
88.
88?
Well, I think this is 88. I don't know. But I'll let you finish. Go ahead with the introduction.
It's a podcast, not about math. It's about politics. We are the co-chairs for Democrats Abroad in Canada's capital region of Ottawa. Hello, Rachel.
Hello, David.
How are you?
I'm okay. I'm laughing. I'm kind of drunk on the sonority here.
The what?
The sonority, the richness of audio. We should explain. We are together in the same studio for the first time since the pandemic. So
we've got very much used to recording this through Zoom, and then things have changed in our lives, and all of a sudden a studio recording facility that's kind of close to both of us becomes available.
Yeah.
So we might as well get together.
We can actually see each other.
Oh yeah.
Weird.
Think of all the weird hand signals we're going to make. Now that we can do
above
this.
the table or below it.
What?
I don't know. Like I said, drunk on the sonority.
What podcasts are you doing?
Oh, spin-offs.
A whole podcast called Below the Table with Rachel Oyster.
And David Schellenberg.
I'm not a part of that.
We'll see.
I'll be the one below the table. Maybe that's what...
Okay, there you go.
Okay, who's with us? No, I don't know where this is going. All right, who's with us today?
So our guest in the cafe today is Amanda Klakowski von Kompenfels, who is a reader in migration and politics at the University of Kent and a researcher in you know what, Amanda? I totally blew that, didn't I? They're the same thing.
Well, it's
a reader and a researcher in migration and politics.
A reader and a researcher.
Okay, I'm looking at it going, I just said that. Amanda is both a reader and a researcher in migration and politics, and also a member of Democrats Abroad.
That I am.
Hello, Amanda. How's your day going?
Welcome.
My day is going just fine. I'm delighted to be here with you two.
It's great to have you. Sorry we got off to such a punchy start, but but actually where we'll begin is with our standard question for people who belong to DA or who live elsewhere in the world, which is, where are you? We already established you're at the University of Kent, but tell us why you're there, what brought you there, and what keeps you there.
And where do you vote?
And where you vote. What state?
I live in Brussels, in Belgium, and I am at the University of Kent's Brussels campus, which is closing down. So I am shifting more to a freelance and consultancy-based status as researcher on overseas Americans and broader migration issues.
Wow.
I have been out of the United States since 1996. I first went to Berlin to do research for my PhD. And while I was there, I met a guy, ended up being married to him, been married 25 years now.
Nice.
And so we are in Brussels together. I vote in Massachusetts and have done since I first voted there as an 18-year-old.
Ah, that's where I vote as well.
And once again, the reason that you never moved back to the United States is love.
Yeah, we have found that.
And that's something that I used to... When I give talks about my book and my research, I say, I used to think I was special. And then I realized that actually I'm not special at all, that it turns out that love and partnership is pretty much the main reason that folks move abroad and stay abroad.
Oh, my goodness.
That combined with other things. I got a great job.
Oh, yeah. Yes. This is a seminal moment for the Blue Vote Cafe, though, because we have contended since we started asking people this question that it's love that knits the world together. And now we have an actual scientist telling us we were right.
It goes from anecdotal to
proven fact.
Y'all have been right all along.
All along. Well, we suspected, but it's really nice to have the confirmation of somebody who studies this. Yeah.
And it's interesting. You've made a career out of studying Americans who live abroad. Is that what you're saying?
I started off as a migration researcher. I studied ethnic Germans who moved from the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe to Germany. And then I was living abroad, and people kept asking me about migration to the United States because I was an American. Mm-hmm. And so I learned more about migration to the United States. And one day, actually at a DA meeting, I realized that we were migrants and that we're doing exactly the same thing that most other migrants groups do. We're engaged in politics in our home country, and that's a thing called political transnationalism. And so from about 2005, I started studying Americans abroad as a migrant group. And so I've been doing that ever since, and alongside running a master's program in international migration. And so I run the master's program in international migration and focus on overseas Americans as my own particular research area.
Wow.
And that is interesting because I suppose the argument is we're already all migrants having ended up in the United States. Mm-hmm. Are we ever going to stop moving around?
Human beings or Americans?
Yeah, both.
I don't think so. I mean, it is migration is probably the oldest human activity, aside from a couple others. But, we all originated from the Rift Valley in Africa, and we migrated out of there following fertile land and following places where we could make a living. And that's what people still do today, not so much following the fertile land, although with climate change and migration, that's certainly an issue, but places where people can make a living, where they are going to better places, where they're following a partner, finding a job. And that applies to human beings, including Americans.
That's so interesting because we are accustomed to thinking of migration as you're in a place and people are coming in to join you. And we look at that group of people from one particular place as a singular group. But you've just, in the way I'm visualizing it anyway, you've just turned that on its head. You're looking at people coming out from one place and they're going out all over the world. So, but are you still considering Americans outside the U.S. as a group, or are you looking at it as Americans in Australia and Americans in Canada?
That is a really key question. And one of the things we talk about in migration is the concept of diaspora. And diaspora is a group of people traditionally who have a shared identity and shared memories and sentiments. And the question is whether overseas Americans do make up that group. And I sort of straddle the divide. I sort of split it. I take the easy way out and say that overseas Americans have diasporic tendencies. Because for sure there are aspects up until 2015, when same-sex marriage was legalized on the federal level in the United States. You may be familiar with the love exiles,
yes,
including Martha McDevitt-Pugh, Robbie Checkaway, a couple other DA members who lobbied in front of Congress, pointing out that Americans with same-sex foreign partners could not sponsor their spouses for green cards the same way that Americans with opposite-sex partners could.
Absolutely.
And so the love exiles were, in a very strong sense, an element of the overseas American population who were diaspora, people who had been forced to leave the United States in order to stay together with their partners. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights protects the right to a family. And they had to leave in order to have that family. So there are certainly groups within the overall group of overseas Americans that we can really see as having aspects of diaspora. Of course, now same-sex marriage or marriage equality is in the United States. But a lot of people didn't go back because they had left to be able to found their families and stayed abroad.
Right. Wow.
And then there are other groups as well, but that's one example I think that fits very well in that sort of sense of overseas Americans around the world had something connecting them under the love exile umbrella.
Right, for sure. Wow.
It's interesting to think about these things in a slightly different way than I think we traditionally do, which of course is the job of a researcher. So thank you very much. Now, Amanda, you've just got this new article out, which is kind of what prompted this conversation with you. Democrats Abroad: What Motivates Activists to Engage in Political Transnationalism. Tell us a bit about the background behind this article.
Well, this was part of a special issue for the journal International Migration. And it was looking at a number of countries around the world. Why is it that the overseas population engage in politics? What motivates them? Mm-hmm. And what does the U.S. have in common with other countries? And so that's something that I also have looked at in my research is the U.S. a unique case? Are overseas Americans really very different from other migrants? Or do we have a lot in common with others? Mm-hmm. And that was something also that I was looking at in this article. Is why are folks involved?
Right.
Why do they work for Democrats Abroad the way that they do? And I will specify that the reason I particularly looked at Democrats Abroad is because Republicans Abroad dissolved in 2013, right, and Republicans Overseas started in 2013. They do not have the same sort of grassroots presence that DA does. They are not recognized as a formal party.
Right.
So in order to sort of meet my selection criteria of people who were very engaged in a political level, that meant it was Democrats abroad.
Right.
I absolutely would have included Republicans had there been a parallel party, but there is not.
Right.
Okay. And how did you do the research then?
So I reached out to some folks I knew, and so as they call it, drawing on existing networks, and then what's called the snowball method. I asked folks to refer me to folks they knew, and I ended up with 14 interviews of people who are either present or past elected or appointed leaders in Democrats abroad. So super volunteers and elected and appointed leaders, and I drew on a publication from a while ago. Author Shannon Barth look at activists abroad as being silent members, passive members, or core members. And so I was particularly looking at these core members of the political diaspora. And I spoke with them to get a sense of what motivated them to spend hours and hours and hours every week working for Democrats abroad.
That's a really good question.
And
what did you learn?
Are you able to tell us why we are doing this?
Why are we doing this?
Well, one simple thing, 12 of the 14 got more involved because somebody asked them.
Because somebody asked them.
Somebody said, hey, we have an open position. Would you consider running for it? Hey, we could really use some help managing this. Could you help?
You should make a podcast. And
I'm not sure who asked us to do this, but it's an.
But the other thing was that much like migration, people aren't involved just for one reason. There were a bunch of things that popped up. So, 12 of the 14 had been asked, hey, why don't you get involved? And they said, okay. But that, of course, wasn't enough to keep people involved, right? And so what I found really, really interesting in the 6 main reasons that came out of my research was that there were a lot of similarities with folks from other countries. That this idea of, are U.S. citizens migrants or are we some other expat kind of category? And I'm going to say that American citizens, U.S. citizens living abroad are migrants. There are the same types of things motivating people.
Wow.
One of them, and this was the one that popped up the most, was to change things at home. That folks really were involved because they wanted things back in the U.S. To be as good as they perceived their own lives abroad.
Wow.
Oh, really? Yeah. So we're just busybodies.
Idealists. Yes.
Idealists and empathy is what comes across. And this is actually something super difficult when you look at migrants. That's something called social remittances. So remittances are money that people send back home.
Right.
And social remittances are sort of values and ideals and so forth.
Wow.
And typically social remittances are thought to flow from places like Europe and the United States to the global South. And what I found out is that social remittances are also flowing from Europe and the rest of the world to the United States.
Wow.
Things like women's rights. Things like childcare, public transportation, gun control, healthcare. All of these are parts of life, health insurance, affordable education, that people would really like to see folks in the United States taking on board.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And Global South. Hold on, Global South isn't a term I've heard before. Can you just give us a quick explanation? What's the Global South?
Sure. In academics, we tend to talk about the global North and the global South. And what that is it is a more up-to-date version. We used to talk about the developed world and the developing world. And that is, those aren't terms that we really tend to view as quite appropriate anymore.
Right.
So we tend to talk about the global North and the global South, which is also not quite accurate because Australia would be considered part of the global North. But so global North being United States, Europe, increasingly parts of Asia, but essentially the wealthier countries or OECD members largely.
Wow, interesting. But again, you are substantiating something that we have speculated about, that a lot of us experience benefits to living outside the country that are not available to our fellow citizens at home, and that we do want to do something about it. That's really fascinating.
So did you find that Democrats who are living abroad, were we already politically motivated when we were still in the United States, or is this something we picked up along the way?
Good question.
That's an excellent question. And that's actually questions that's in another survey that I and two colleagues, Jay McCann and Ron Rappaport, are about to start. We have a survey that we are going to be rolling out very, very shortly among Democrats Abroad members. And that is one of the questions that we ask is, were you politically involved before you left the United States, or did you become politically involved after you were already abroad? It seems to be, my research until now has shown it seems to be a bit of both. But so we do need more research on that particular question.
Well, particularly paired with your observation that most people get involved because they are asked, that would suggest either that they weren't before or that it didn't occur to them that they could continue that particular pursuit outside the country. And it's also, when you said that, it made me, it reminded me of when we talked to Jason Berlin from Field Team 6, who claims that most people who've never voted before have not voted because nobody asked them to, which is a little confounding, but also very interesting.
Now, when I say that people got involved because somebody asked, that's involved at a higher level. They were already at a Democrats Abroad meeting, for instance, when somebody said, hey, we have an open position for treasurer. Why don't you run?
Right. That makes sense.
So it's the getting involved at that core level, at sort of shifting from a passive member, in Shannon Bart's terminology, to one who is a more core activist.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Did you learn anything else about Democrats Abroad as you were doing your research?
Again, this wasn't really about Democrats Abroad. I mean, that was where I drew my interviewees from as people who are engaged politically. So I think this probably does apply more broadly, but again, for the research is required. Two other things that I want to make sure I mention. One is something called reactive transnationalism, and that typically looks at migrants, often in the United States or in Europe. And if they've not been able to really find their place in the host society, they might do what's called withdraw to their national communities. And that sort of explains why folks hang out in a group of folks from their own country, is that they feel more comfortable there because they have not been able to find a comfortable spot either economically or socially or culturally in the host country. And it turns out that's something that explains why U.S. citizens might get more involved with Democrats abroad or Republicans overseas, is that they are told that Americans, have horrible foreign policy or do this, that, or the other, or Americans are this kind of negative thing or that kind of negative thing. And so folks will turn to Democrats abroad and say, all right, let's do something about that policy in the United States. And so that's something that came out much more strongly in my earlier research, but was present here also.
I would imagine, 14 is a small sample size for this question, but that you may see differences depending on which country the people you interview are. In Canada, we find that Americans just sort of dissolve into the general population. We don't, you don't hear an American voice on the street and go, oh, my people, because we all kind of sound the same and look the same and approach life in a similar way in Canada. But in another country where English is not the primary language, you're much more visible.
Exactly. No, and that's the thing, is that overseas Americans, the majority seem to be white. So in white majority countries, say France, Germany, where I live in Belgium, they're not immediately visible walking down the street, but for most of them, people will still have an accent, even if they speak the country language pretty well. So once they open their mouths, they're identifiable as American. I happen to have a German accent in my French, but that's another question.
Something due to your past, no doubt.
German, which got me out of some issues at various points in time. But but yeah, Canada, I think is different in that respect.
Right. So where were the 14 people that you interviewed?
They were from around the world. They were in Europe, in Canada, elsewhere in the Americas, and in Asia Pacific as well.
Oh, great! Interesting.
I was able to get a. Interestingly, I tried to get a gender balance, but of the 14 folks I interviewed, 13 were women.
That sounds like Democrats abroad. Yeah.
Core.
It turns out that seems to be so. If the number one reason that folks move abroad and stay abroad is love, then women are more likely to follow men than the other way around.
Right.
still going on.
Right.
And women are also, I cite some research that shows women are more likely to be involved in volunteer work than are men.
Right.
Sorry, David.
What did I do?
Dude, you pull your weight. Don't worry about it. You're fine.
Yeah. If anything, I need to stop doing some of these volunteer projects.
Oh my God.
And then there was one other thing that popped up, and that really was the sort of finding that indicated this might be a little bit of a different population. And that was that folks were very aware of the role of the United States in the world, the geopolitical role of the United States, and the importance of their vote, and the importance of getting other folks to vote. That a vote in the United States and the outcome of a presidential election in the United States has repercussions not just for the U.S. but for the world.
Right.
And that's something that a number of my interviewees really mentioned as something that motivated them to be very involved.
Right. And it also strikes me that not all countries allow their citizens outside their borders the equal access to voting. The U.S. is actually pretty liberal about that.
It's increased substantially in the last 20 years. It's something that really has, for instance, the UK has is just now allowing all of its citizens abroad to vote. Until recently, only those who had been abroad for 15 years or less were able to vote in elections, including the Brexit referendum. Others require some form of registration, but it is something that has increased quite a bit in the last 20 years, and that's also where my research fits is within that sort of area, looking at overseas voting in general.
Cool.
And overseas engagement.
Canada has expanded its ability for citizens to vote abroad as well.
I wrote to my son.
Tell him to vote.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, as a part of your research, when you find people like Democrats abroad living abroad, one of the questions we get asked every time we go to vote is, are we ever going back to the United States, or are we sort of staying in the part of the world that we are in?
Or is it uncertain? Yeah, my return is uncertain.
Or is it just not going to happen?
Right.
What we check on our check boxes is irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly.
But I am curious if one of the things you learned is if these people are living abroad and have no intention of ever going back to the United States, but still feel the need to be involved in U.S. politics for a country that, as time passes, will become less and less a part of their life.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, that is sort of this idea of a diaspora then, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that takes us right back to this question of, is this a diaspora? And members of a diaspora are folks who are still emotionally connected to their homeland.
Right.
And so folks are voting, and they are engaged, and they are involved. And they are voting for their friends. They are voting for their family members. They are voting and engaged for a country they love, for a country they think could do with better health care and do with more affordable education and do with better maternity benefits and child care and public transportation. Gun control. And so it's something that people vote because they care.
Right.
And that's something that a lot of folks have been abroad for many years. And maybe they'll move back, maybe they won't. I mean, this is some other research I've done looks at immigration aspiration. So folks who are thinking about leaving the United States. And quite a few people have some indications that they might think about leaving, but very few are actually going to. Because all of those pieces do need to fall into place. And I think it's the same thing about heading back to the United States. All those pieces need to fall into place in order to make it happen. And once you've got a family abroad and once you've got a job abroad, then abroad starts becoming home.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason I asked that question is because I've tried to figure out why I'm involved in all this. Because I'm one of the accidental Americans. Like I don't have any family in the United States. I've got nothing down there. My parents were going to university in Iowa for a couple of years, and my parents are Canadian inside out and backwards. So because I was born on U.S. soil, I'm an American, whether I want to be or not. Mm-hmm. My parents are Canadian. I live in Canada, and I honestly have less and less intention to move back to the United States. But yet I still feel the need to get involved. And maybe from the Canadian perspective, which could be different from the globe, it's that we look at so much U.S. news. It's so inundated. We're so inundated by it in this country that you almost feel the need to get involved just because you can. Like, is that common?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit falling into my category of what I coded as the role of the U.S. in the world, is that you have the legal right to be involved in the United States. And, it's a lot to be involved in. It's a big place to have a voice.
And admittedly, I ignored my U.S. citizenship for decades until an individual got on an escalator and glided into U.S. history. And then all of a sudden, I was sitting on the couch yelling at the TV and realized that you know what, I could actually make a difference in this, and activated a part of myself which I was perfectly happy to ignore.
But the more you're
not on your own, I think there.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
I said, David, you're not on your own with that one, I think. That I think a lot of people get involved because they feel they can make a difference.
Because they see a need, they see trouble, and they realize that rather than passively sit and watch, you have an ability and you might as well use it.
And the more you do, often the more interesting it becomes, the more you see ways in which you can have an effect, and you learn where to put your skills and what effect that'll have.
And then you're allowed to complain.
And then you're allowed to complain. Yes, all you people out there who don't vote,
well, that's all
no
the people in Canada, people in Canada who give me lectures on U.S. politics. And it's like, well, what do you know? You're a Canadian.
Do you have any American friends?
See, and that's that reactive transnationalism right there, is when you get the lectures from folks in Canada, you can turn around and say, but I'm doing something about it.
Yeah, that's true. Fascinating. I'm just wondering, all this that you've learned about Americans living outside the country, and obviously it opens up new questions for you, but is there some way we can parlay this information into furthering our goals, I guess?
I mean, I think one of the things that is to remind people why they are involved. But the idea of voting and engagement as a civic duty was something else that came up. So civic duty and reminding people that they can make a difference, I think is a way forward, and ask people to get involved.
Right. And when you have an opening, tell somebody, we need you to do this. And then, make a core volunteer.
That's so accurate on so many things in life. Somebody might know that they can vote, but until you actually prompt them, and anybody who's been involved in politics for a long, long time knows when a politician knocks on your door and asks, can you vote for me? A lot of times people do, but they have to be asked before they will do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you've given us a little idea of some of the things you're going to look at next, but do you want to talk a bit about what research you are contemplating coming up?
Well, a couple things I'm working on right now, but one of them is indeed a survey of Democrats abroad global, and it would be fabulous if people click on open when that link comes their way. Only when we have a lot of respondents are we able to actually get data that tell us, give us some serious answers.
And one of the things that we have seen in the United States is there is overall a lack of information just about Americans generally living abroad, even including basic numbers of how many of us are there and where are we in the world. Is that accurate?
I mean, the number question is the eternal one that we all rub our heads over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the U.S. State Department says 9 million. That's based on estimates coming out of embassies and consulates, based on consular reports of birth abroad, based on registrations, based on passport issuance and renewals.
Wow.
FDAP estimates just under 5 million. But I would tend to go with a higher estimate. I think that most of the estimates are limited in one way or another. One of the things that I tell my students is I say, in my household, there are 3 Germans, 3 Belgians, and 3 Americans. How many people are in my household?
3, I think, is the answer. Yeah.
Nope. There are 4 people in my household.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it could be any number between 3.
I and my kids, I have Belgian citizenship and U.S. citizenship. My husband is just German, and my kids have German, Belgian, and U.S.
There you go.
And neither I nor my kids are caught in Belgian data. So if you look at Belgian data, U.S. citizens, we don't pop up.
Right. Wow, it's
So
fascinating.
you have a lot of undercounts in a lot of different data sources. And so relying on foreign government estimates of U.S. citizens abroad is going to give you an undercount. And then you have a lot of folks who have a birthplace in that country. My kids were born in Belgium, so they're not going to pop up in any kind of data on foreign birthplace. But there's not a lot known about overseas Americans. And I think part of that is that we as a group are not seen as being of service to the U.S. government. And I think that's actually short-sighted on the part of the U.S. government, because a lot of people do view themselves as informal ambassadors, and people who, when they do get the lectures from folks in Canada or Belgium or Germany or wherever, about U.S. politics, they explain it. We explain it. We explain what's going on. We may or may not defend policies, but we're able to shed some light on them. And I think that's something that really could be taken advantage of more by U.S. government, by U.S. policymakers. And I think that's something that there could be more known about overseas Americans, and it's a population that could be reached out to more.
Absolutely. It makes so much sense. So for this particular project, when you landed the 14 people to talk to, you mentioned 2 ways of finding them. I don't remember the first one. The second one was the snowball method.
The snowball, yeah.
Yeah. So where I'm going is you as a researcher and we including you as members of Democrats Abroad, looking for people who can vote and don't know they can. Those people are hard to find. Do you have ideas about how we reach them?
Yeah.
I know. I made you laugh because I know that's probably one of your central questions.
That's one of our central questions. Where are they?
Talk to us about that.
Where is everybody?
A lot of folks have settled in. They're about 70% of overseas Americans who are married seem to have a non-U.S. spouse. So a lot of folks are settled in. They're integrated. Their kids are in local schools. They speak the local language more than they speak English. So they have U.S. passports, and sure, they'd vote if you got hold of them. But they're not at the expat hangouts. They're not at the bar showing the Super Bowl in the middle of the night.
Right.
And
maybe the debate watch, though. The debate watch.
Oh, debate.
Raise your mind.
I thought the Americans sit around watching Baywatch. That's how you could tell them they're in a bar somewhere.
Right. No, but I think what we're doing in Belgium is we have a lot of a number of spokespeople who speak on French and Dutch TV and radio, and I think keeping that up seems to be something that's pretty important.
For sure. But then we often run up against the same problem that you carefully mentioned, which is that often, if you want to talk on the radio, they don't want to hear from just Democrats. They want Democrats and Republicans.
Yep. And that is also another perennial question is, are there more Democrats abroad or are there more Republicans abroad? And that's something that, it certainly seems that Democrats have the stronger grassroots presence. I think it's coming down to there are more Democrats abroad. There are more Democrats who are living abroad than there are Republicans who are living abroad. But maybe the Republicans just aren't as vocal.
Or they've converted to Democrats after moving out of the country. No, we talked to...
Or maybe the Republicans just don't like to vote for their candidate.
That's true.
I've certainly talked to folks who used to be Republican. And once moving abroad, they've told me that they realized that, actually public transportation was a pretty good thing. And that, maybe you did have to pay a bit higher tax in order to get good public transportation. But actually, that was really kind of a good thing. And so they have shifted leftward in their voting since moving abroad.
Quite possibly. When we just recently talked to Ken Martin, who's the vice chair of the DNC, who gave us a figure. He said 80% of the people living outside the country are Democrats. And he didn't say, we should have asked him where he got that number from, but it was an actual number. So, I mean, that's really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd love to know which source. That's great.
Yeah. Maybe we can pursue that.
Actual data.
Yeah,
That's
actual
fabulous.
data would be great. But I mean, he just said it with great confidence, 80%. And also,
There is a lack of data. Like we know this.
We know that, yeah.
There's a lack of data.
Yeah.
And that's something that I know we're just about out of time, but I can tell you another time about the challenges in sampling overseas populations.
Well,
just in general?
yeah, I mean, we have a little more time if you want to give us
go.
Unless it's just too much to squeeze into a few minutes.
I mean, I'll sum it up. So basically, when you have polls or surveys, what you're doing is you are interviewing or surveying a smaller number of people who are representative of a larger population. But in order to do that, you need to know what that larger population looks like. So when you see polls about who is ahead, Trump or Biden, that's based on a survey of 1,000 people, and then it is weighted according to the population of the United States, according to the characteristics of the U.S. Mm-hmm. The problem is we don't know the population of overseas Americans, so it's very hard to pull a sample out of that.
Right.
There's been attempts made to do a census of the overseas Americans about 20 years ago, and that was not effective. And so really trying to get a good sense of who that population is still a work in progress.
Wow, fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I guess, is there anything else that you haven't gotten to say that you'd like to tell us?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Okay.
Y'all are great interviewers.
Thanks. Well, we can always have you back
Yeah.
after your next finding. We'd love to talk about this
After
more.
the next report comes out, you're going to have to tell us what you learned on that one.
That's right.
Sounds good.
Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you for having me.
We will keep an eye on what you do next.
Yeah.
If you live outside the U.S., go to votefromabroad.org to register with your voting state and request your ballot all in one step. And if you want to find all of the Blue Vote Cafe episodes, visit bluevotecafe.com. I'm Rachel Oikster with David Schellenberg in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for listening to Democrats Abroad, the Blue Vote Cafe.